is you were still in college and then you got the opportunity to invest in the bourbon barrels at like 20, 21 years old.
I started with 9 of our original 12 investors. I was still at my corporate engineering job.
So you're 28, me and you're actually the same age, but you made it on the Forbes 30 under 30. What does that actually cost you personally? Like what's the version of juggling all of that nobody sees behind the scene, behind the skew?
I think in my early 20s, I sacrificed a lot of social life.
Welcome to Behind the Skew. So glad you were able to make it on, and we can just kind of get right into it if that's okay with you. So tell everyone who you are and what you got going on.
Yeah, well, my name's Morgan Salsman. Thanks for having me on, Scotty. It's very exciting to be here. And I operate a couple different companies in the alcoholic beverage space, particularly in the bourbon industry. So we've got two companies, LQD Assets and BRBN Storage. And between the two, we really operate at the intersection of alternative assets, commercial real estate, and bourbon, which are three things you don't usually hear in the same sentence. But we've been working in the alcoholic beverage space, in the bourbon space for about 7 years now, going on 8. I started, investing in the space when I was in college. And it's really an opportunity that's grown since then. I got exposure to the space by growing up in Bardstown, Kentucky. So, been around it my entire life. And that's what gave me the passion kind of to dive into this industry. We've grown, like I said, from 2019 till now, from 9 investors in our investment fund to up over 100 entities. We've raised over $21 million where we utilize that money to buy barrels on behalf of brands and basically utilize it to keep inventory and assets off of their books so they can use the capital to operationally run their business. And then we also have our storage facility where we currently age about 70,000 barrels. It's about 110,000 square feet worth of warehousing space. And we build whiskey brands. So anything from idea to finished product, we can help with the sales side of things as well, marketing, digital advertising. But really, we're the operational arm of a lot of these smaller whiskey brands, help them kind of get their feet on the ground, work through co-packing, dry goods, storage, and, even sourcing their liquid, which a lot of inventory out there right now, but you still got to find the right stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And then, growing up in Bardstown, like you said, I mean, literally the bourbon capital of the world. So you were surrounded by that your entire life.
Absolutely.
So yeah, what did bourbon really, kind of mean to you growing up? Was it just something that was happening around you that you saw? I'm sure just driving around, even going to the grocery store, you just see all the distilleries and plants, or was it something a little bit more, what was happening around you?
Yeah, so my grandfather on my mom's side worked at Barton's. He was a plant manager there for a while, and I think he was on the bottling side of things. I think he ran the bottling lines, and so he was involved there. He ended up building a hotel that is now the Trail Hotel. If you ever visit Bardstown, so he stayed in the hospitality space and really supported that side of the economy in the Bardstown area. And my dad's side of the family was in construction. So they were working on distillery projects. They were working on a lot of other things too. But it's always been something that's been around me. And even in my neighborhood, there were, rick houses across the street next to the train tracks, and they were everywhere. And you could smell the mash growing up. Like that's such a familiar smell to me. It's a lot of, when you're young, you're like, oh, the bourbon industry, whatever. But once you start, coming of age to drink and you see the impact of the industry on the economy in the state, it becomes a much bigger fish. And, I definitely think it impacted my life growing up just from the exposure to it. But, it really didn't become so ingrained in my life until I was probably a junior in college when I started learning about the economics behind the industry. Aside from that, it was really kind of just a heritage thing of like, oh, I'm from Bardstown, Kentucky. Well, no one knows where that is. And if you say the bourbon capital of the world or Jim Beam, they're like, oh, I know where that is. Yep, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah, yeah, it's very familiar. Yeah, and then I know you went to University of Alabama for civil engineering, and I know you mentioned a moment ago that some of your family was in like construction. And is that kind of what drove you to do civil engineering?
Yes, it was a little bit of I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went with the path of least resistance and, saw the engineering degree as an opportunity. And I think engineering in general, no matter what branch you do, it's really applicable to any career that you want to do afterwards. And, they teach you a bunch of problem solving skills. You take economics classes, you take all of the, business classes alongside the technical engineering. And so I just think it's a great foundation regardless of what industry you go into. Of course, it's easier if you're going to go into finance to get a finance degree, but engineering does give you a lot of great tools to succeed in other areas of the, of the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, that engineering I mean, yeah, there are a lot of problems you have to solve with engineering, right? It's pretty complex and sometimes small mistakes can cost you, but it's pretty relevant everywhere. But the part about your story that I really love, honestly, is you were still in college and then you got the opportunity to invest in the bourbon barrels at like 20, 21 years old. That's not pretty usual, I'd say. How did that even happen? Like what was the story behind how that even became a thing and what were you doing at that time too?
Yeah, when I was young, I would always ask my dad operated a construction company like I mentioned, and a lot of his friends were also entrepreneurs, and so I would frequently ask them about what it's like to run a business and ask them about, the stock market and what are they doing, and they would always talk to me about those kind of things. And so we had like my uncle, my dad, a couple of their friends had all gotten into this group of buying bourbon barrels from a local distillery that we had. And at first, it was kind of just a fun thing to do of like, oh, this is cool. And then you learn that they appreciate in value over time. And you're like, oh, so this can be fun and it can make me money. And so, they started doing that. And then I got a phone call that was like, hey, we're doing this. I know you've always asked us about things. Like, do you want to participate? And for me, I viewed that as, almost a private equity esque opportunity to participate in an alternative asset investment without having any money and also without having any experience. And so I was like, heck yeah, like teach me what you're doing. I'd love to help and participate and watch and expand outside of at that time. The only thing I had invested in was, the stock market. And so that was how I got into it in the first place. And I kind of became a little bit obsessed with it for a while. And I would told all my friends about it, and they were like, "I don't this is crazy. I don't know what you're talking about." And the more that I grew in it and the more educated I became and I started telling them about it, they were like, "Oh, that's really cool and that's unique." And so I started doing that my junior year of college, I think. It might have been my senior year, one of those two. And then when I graduated and was working at my engineering job, I continued to do this and we were growing. We were buying a lot more barrels, and the gentleman who had started it had kind of said, this has been fun, but it's kind of becoming a full-time job and almost like a chore to manage this, and it's not fun anymore. And I was like, well, I think this is fun. So how about you teach me what you're doing and I'll manage it. And after some time, we kind of went through it and determined that it was best for me to go out and start my own gig doing it. And so changed the structure of what we were doing, made it a little bit more formalized. And it also allowed us to change the way we were collecting our or categorizing our our returns on investment. And so that was really beneficial for our investors. It increased their net profit after we sold the barrels, because of how you can allocate it as ordinary income versus capital gains. And so we used to claim ordinary income, now we can claim capital gains with the restructuring that we've done, which was great. And so I started with 9 of our original 12 investors. I was still at my corporate engineering job. While I was at the engineering job, I probably raised 10 to 12 million on the nights and weekends, which was great. And then I realized, I had about a 6-month period of time that I had to catch up to the contracts I had committed to on the purchase side. And I did the math and I was like, I don't have enough time here to turn around and just do this on nights and weekends. So I walked in the next day and quit my job. And my boss was a little surprised. He was like, I knew this was coming, but I didn't think it was coming right now. And so that was off to the races for me. It took me probably 2 years to raise the 21 million, which was great and time consuming. I mean, I spent all hours of the day, nights and weekends, you know, raising money, and it gave me a good little bit of a runway because I knew when my contracts were going to hit. And so before I left my engineering job, the last project I actually did was develop our whiskey warehouses. So the warehouses we have at BRBN storage, that was the last project I designed. Once we turned in those plans, that was the week before I left my job. So it was pretty cool to get to see all that go down and learn the ins and outs of the business from a different angle from that engineering side of things, because there's a lot of compliance that goes into it. So, you have distances between warehouses that you have to maintain, you have sprinkler requirements, you have containment requirements, and we had to build a fire pond on site because we didn't have enough water supply to the site. And so, you know, That's the side of the industry I don't think many people see. It's almost like I would put it in the logistics category of, warehousing. So it doesn't sound fun or flashy, but when you put, whiskey barrels in a warehouse, that warehouse gets a little bit more exciting, I think. So it's been a pretty cool process. And if you would have asked me at 21 years old when I started doing this, if this is where I would have ended up, I don't think I would have said yes. So it's pretty cool to see how quickly those kind of things can change.
Yeah, yeah, 21. I mean, I remember being 21 a little while ago. And, yeah, we're not a lot of us, especially those in school, we're just trying to survive midterms and final exams. We weren't thinking about investments and getting into, tangible appreciating assets. So you were definitely quite a few steps ahead of us. It's nice to, have people around you that could teach you those things. I mean, a lot of us were same as you at the time, investing in stocks and taking our gamble there, buying NFTs, cryptos,
Those are
all
some
that
ones too.
interesting stuff. But yeah, and then making that decision to just pull the trigger and leave engineering, I think a lot of people are usually in that point when they're, scaling a business. And, I've been there working my corporate job and then starting my advisory company and then just getting to a point where you go, all right, one of two things has to happen. Either we stop the business or we stop, the stable, respectable, consistent job that we have with good benefits. So what are we going to do here? And then we just make that decision and take a chance, I think, on ourselves. And it's obviously paid off for you. So now you're running the thing for real. I mean, you raised the capital with some good accredited investors, managing barrel inventories, consulting for other brands too. What were like the early days of actually building LQD, right? LDQ or LQD?
LQD. So it's like
LQD.
liquid without the vowels.
Okay. Okay. So LQD, what did that look like? Because I certainly wasn't, like you said, it doesn't seem like that would be smooth sailing from day one, having to literally put a pond at your facility and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, day 1 for me was really capital raising. And like I said, it was nights and weekends for me because I was still at my engineering job and, I did a ton of networking for that. And a lot of my early investors were people I'd met through my construction and engineering experience or that were, local to Kentucky and understood the industry. Now we have investors in, I think, 16 states. We might be up to 17. And a lot of them I've met through LinkedIn, through networking events. I do a ton of networking all across the country. I travel a lot. And so, having clients and investors in different places, they all expose me to all these new opportunities. And so it's almost like a snowball effect in that regard and referrals too. Those first 9 investors, I reached out to them and I was like, "Hey, send me 3 people that you think may potentially be interested in making some money passively." Like I didn't even say that would be interested in the whiskey barrel investment specifically. I was like, "Let me just talk to these people." And I think my stats when I kind of closed up shop on the heavy recruiting of investors was I think I had probably 800 to 1,000 people I had spoken to, and I ended up with 100 entities that invested. And, if you look at sales data, I think that's a pretty good return, but still a ton of conversations to have. And it took a lot of time, a lot of energy to do it, but you get into the groove of it and start to really understand it. But that was the true early days. And when we went and decided to develop our warehouses. Again, I was still at my engineering job. So, I was trying to do the gig on the side and help, just with my engineering experience. And it was a much bigger project than I could handle on my own. And so I, talked to my partners and I was like, can we just take this through my company and I can do this during my day job? And it was a little bit more expensive to do it that way, obviously, but we got all of our I's dotted and T's crossed and it was the right choice for us and we got the project done. I got to work on it and keep it under, my control. And I mean, it was really fun to work on. It was complex because, you got to move a bunch of dirt around, a lot of grading we had to do because Kentucky's pretty hilly. And then you got to set, FFEs with bedrock that's sitting at the surface. So, that's an expensive thing to deal with. Ideally, you don't have to do any, explosions to get rid of bedrock, but that was something we had to consider when we were setting our floors, finished floors on these buildings. And it was definitely a complex project to work on. But like I said, in engineering, you get so much satisfaction out of that problem solving. It's like, give me all the constraints and let me find the solution that'll work. And it was a good one to work on that front as well.
Yeah, that's fun. That's exciting too, you know? And you actually, like, solve the problem. You're like, "Oh, we made it work." But, a lot of people don't think about that either. I think it's a kind of an untalked about thing of, like, building your own space from scratch. There are so much red tape when it comes to city, state, county ordinances, especially in the alcohol industry and a lot of the requirements around that too. But, man, it is not just, "Hey, we're gonna build a location." And then you find a piece of land and you go, great, let's do it. So there's so many layers that come into that. But something you talked about was hearing a lot of no's pretty early on. I mean, those are really great numbers, talking to 800 to 1,000 potential investors, and that being 100 is pretty solid. So you probably had a really good pitch deck, I would say. But how, like, what was that like hearing so many no's and then just continuing to push through? You have an idea, you have a good story behind it, and you know that it's something that can work. What was that like? Just like pushing through all the no's to get those 100 plus yeses.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing happened on the supply side too. So, like, talking to the distilleries at the time when we were buying, we were buying in pretty small quantities when we started in 2019, and as we grew there, I had to go back to them when our contracts ended and be like, "Hey, we want to keep doing this," and they were like, "Well, get in line. We've got all kinds of people wanting to buy whiskey barrels," and so, it took me while I was recruiting these investors, I was also knocking on the doors of these distilleries trying to figure out who was gonna give me barrels, and, I mean, one of our distilling partners, it took me about 9 months of meeting with them once a month to convince them to work with us, and so, the conversation went a little bit like, "Okay, we wanna buy whiskey barrels from you. Okay, we can't do that." I was like, "Okay, what if we bring our own empty barrels in and you just fill them for us and store them?" And then they were like, "No, still not good enough, but thanks, come back." And then I came back to them and I was like, "Okay, what if we supply our own barrels and we take our barrels immediately off site and put them in our own storage facility? All you have to do is put the whiskey in the barrels." And then finally they were like, "Okay, that's a deal. We can do that." And so, it took some negotiating on that side, and, that was a fun victory to receive. And like I said, that was kind of when I was like, "Oh, I have a time constraint here of finding these investors." And so on the investor side of things, I don't know that I was really ever offended by a no, because I understand, like, when you're investing your money, one, if you're investing in something that you don't understand, it's really hard to get over that hurdle. And it is a complex industry and people don't understand, that whiskey barrels appreciate in value over time. And if you can't understand the cycle of that, I wouldn't want to invest in it either. When people explain to me like options trading and or investing in, like coffee bean farms or like oil and gas, those are things I don't understand. And if I can't understand it, it's really hard for me to invest in it. And when I'm speaking to investors, I'm having that same conversation and that same compassion for, you need to be understanding this asset. And if you can't understand it, you shouldn't invest in it. I don't ever want to force somebody to participate. So the no's never hurt my feelings. And a lot of those no's eventually turned into a yes. So, or they referred me to somebody who has helped me in some other capacity, or maybe somebody they referred me became an investor themselves. So I don't know. I think there was a little bit of oblivion too, maybe. I think when I was younger, I didn't really see the hurdles. Like, they just came and I would jump them. And now looking back at it, I was like, if you put these same set of, hurdles in front of me today, knowing what I know now, I think I would have just been more hesitant. So that oblivion and like lack of, visibility on things, I think really helped me to just like say, here's my plan, here's the goal, here's how I get there, just stay on that path. Where now I have a lot more visibility on the challenges. So, I do think that oblivion really helped me as well. And then just confidence, like knowing what I was talking about, like knowing my deck inside and out, and like truly passionately believing in the product I was providing, I think gave me a lot of credibility walking into these rooms with, 50, 60-year-old men who have been investing in alternative assets for years. And I would have been at the time when I started doing this, like 23. That oblivion and confidence did help me a little bit.
Yeah, so many people would have just probably stopped there. And, this happens all the time. I see it with founders and other business owners. Just they get to an issue or hurdle and I guess maybe in their older age, maybe it is sometimes when we are younger, we do things and we're like, ah, that's fine. We'll figure it out later, or we'll get over it, and figure it out, and yeah, yeah, I think that's kind of a constraint people put on themselves. And I think hearing no, so there's this great book, no tie, but it's called Go for No. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And if
I
anyone
have.
hasn't, go take a read. So it's more about sales than it's more centered towards salespeople. Essentially, the idea behind the principle is if you go until you say you set a goal of I'm going to, for you and for instance, if you said I need 10 investors, that's it. That's where I'm going to stop. Once I get 10 investors, that's my goal. And then you hit that goal, well, you stop, right? But maybe you only got 20 no's, right? But if you set a goal of I'm going to get 100 no's, okay, in tandem with your yes goal, you don't stop until you get 100 people to tell you no.
Mhm.
Well, now you've just obliterated your yes goal because you have 40 yeses instead of 10 yeses. And that's the
Right.
idea. So I think having that perseverance and continue to push on and just, being consistent with people too, like you said, people 9 months later actually, from the supplier side coming through and being interested in what you're doing. But having 100 investors is pretty intense, and that's a lot of capital that you have moving around. So like what was it for you, like keeping that kind of visibility on the money coming in and where it was going, and kind of just managing the investors themselves?
Very good question. But I also very much so agree with that. I've never heard, go for the 100 no's too. I agree because then you're definitely going to blow your yes goal out of the water. I think I'll have to take note of that one and check out that book for sure. But in terms of managing investment when it was coming in, I did all of that manually through Excel for probably the first like 18 months, maybe a year. And I talked to my accountant and I was like, this is getting complicated. And she was like, "Well, yeah, of course it is. Like it's accounting. You really probably shouldn't be doing that in an Excel." And so she and I got together and built out QuickBooks and swapped over to that, and it's helped me manage things much better. I got to the point I hired a bookkeeper. So, we check on that weekly now, and when I'm working through sending out investor information, I send out an email to everyone. Usually I do like a 90, 60, and a 30-day like reminder of here's what you owe, here's when it's due, and here's how you pay it. And so I send that out to everyone, and I just keep a tally of who's paid and who hasn't. And on the back end of allocating that, my bookkeeper, he's the best. His name's Tyler, and he does a killer job of making sure it's organized. And if he sees something funky, he brings it up, and we'll talk about it and get it all sorted out. So I use a small bank that's based out of Kentucky, and so they're also really helpful and flexible. A lot of our investors are still in Kentucky, so they can if they want to do an old fashioned check, they can take it there. So we try to keep everything as flexible and fluid as possible.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, a lot of people don't, and finding a good accountant is a very hard thing to do. I say all the time, just especially being in accounting and finance and being in that space, like you can throw a rock and hit a bookkeeper, but it is a needle in a haystack to find an actual good accountant or bookkeeper. Because I feel like everyone and their mother is a bookkeeper or something, or has like a bookkeeping business
Right.
on the side, and source check people. But it sounds like you have a really good one, which is great. Hold on to him as long as you possibly can.
I will, and, like, he was a game changer when he came in, and, he had fund management background, and so, like, that really helped us when I was explaining to him, "Here's where the money comes in, here's where it goes out." We have hundreds of different maybe not hundreds, but tens of accounts that we're managing, and so he was really able to come in and, like, first off, speak in accounting terms, which I'm not an accountant, so I don't speak in accounting terms. And so he's able to take, my jargon and translate it appropriately and organize things really well. And, that's a vital part of operating a successful business is having a good financial system and being able to track where your money's going. If you don't know where your money's going, you're probably going to lose a lot of it.
You nailed it. I should just take that and just put that on my website and just send that
Yeah,
to everybody
definitely
that I talk
so.
to every day. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. But so many people kind of overlook that. But kind of going back a little bit. So you have the hundreds of investors, tens of millions of dollars, 5 warehouses at completion. I think it's 110 plus square feet, 70,000 barrels. I mean, That's huge, like super serious capital projects, like everything you've done with raising capital and investors. So where does it all go from here at this point of where you're at? Like when you zoom out, what's the version of what you're building now actually look like in maybe 5 years, 7 years?
Yeah, right now, when I started this business, 2022, 2023, I had a 10-year plan because, when you're buying barrel inventory, it can stay aging for, 6, 8, 10, 12 years. And so, our buying plan was about 6 years long. And by the time we were done buying, we planned to be exiting. And so on that cycle, 10 to 12 years on the investment fund was kind of where I saw closed end. If I never did it again, that's the cycle it would take. And then we added in the warehousing, that's a little bit more in perpetuity and can continue longer, even if we don't buy more barrels. Now, I would love to. I'd love to continue doing that and, take these investors, get them some exits and have them reinvest their money. That's the goal. And we've actually had some of that go on from our early days in 2019. We've already had quite a bit of exit from that side of things. So, the goal is to get everyone to keep reinvesting. And as long as we have that cycle reinvesting, bringing in a few new investors every year, we can continue to grow. And on the warehousing side of things, we've got 3 of the 5 warehouses up now, 10,000 square feet today, and it'll basically double if we add those other 2 warehouses. So, that's what our projections are. That's where our plans are. I would love to keep growing it to, that next set of goals that we have. And then once we hit that, we set our next set of goals. In general, I would say, that's a 5-year plan for me is to execute on the business plan I started writing when I joined up in the industry, and if I can do that, I'll be very happy and be looking to, extend that plan afterwards. And I'd be lying to you if I said the plans haven't changed 100 times even in the last 4 or 5 years, but that's part of it. That's part of business, and I like to operate with a framework and then fill in the details as we go because, everything changes and you got to be able to be flexible and adapt with the market, adapt with the needs of your customers and clients, and adapt with, the assets that we have currently, figuring out what to do with them. So, 5-year plan, I think, is pretty good. 10-year plan, I think, is pretty good. After that, I think, give me another 5 years and we can talk more.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's ever evolving. I mean, every market, every industry is changing, and yeah, you have to kind of adapt with it. And so, if you have a business plan and you're still following the same exact business plan from when you started 5 years later, you're in trouble probably. So
Right.
I would say,
Or
either
you
that or
or you time traveled and you just knew what was gonna happen,
yeah, yeah, you're really good at projecting the market and the
Mhm.
industry that you're in and your product or your service. And whoever that is, come talk to me. I'd love to find out how you did that. But I want to ask you something, maybe a little more on the personal side. So you're 28, me and you're actually the same age, but you made it onto Forbes 30 under 30, and then you're running multiple businesses simultaneously with the real estate, the bourbon barrels, warehousing, consulting. What does that actually cost you personally? Like, what's the version of juggling all of that that nobody sees behind the scene, behind the skew?
Yeah, great question. I think in my early 20s, I sacrificed a lot of social life. And, it's a trade off. Is it better? I'm not sure. I do see the value in it long term. And that's who I was at the time. And that's who I am now. Like it's valuable. It's something I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of growing a business. Like that's fun to me. I enjoy it. I enjoy serving others. I enjoy helping other people solve their problems. And like, I think that there's personal satisfaction in that, but like I said, I lost a lot of uh, social capital in order to build this. And also, going from working at a corporate company to being a solopreneur or even just an entrepreneur, you lose a lot of benefits in terms of, healthcare and handling that stuff on your own and also working alone. That's something that I would say I struggle with a little bit is going from having my best friends being my coworkers and seeing them every day to now, my coworkers, if I even have any, are on a screen like this. And so it's a little bit of it's a sacrifice for sure, but I also can do this from anywhere. So, spent last year traveling to 4 or 5 different states, staying for a month or 2 at a time and getting to spend time with some of my friends from college that don't live where I live, and I spent time in Texas, Colorado, New York, and Kentucky, and then also in Tennessee. That's home base for me. But that was something like I wouldn't be able to do with a corporate job. And so, there's a sacrifice that comes with that, but I really enjoy it. And it's a path that I forged for myself. And it's something I wouldn't trade for the world because, I can be there for pretty much any event I need to in somebody's life because I have this flexibility and control. And I also have the discipline to get shit done when I need to. And that is something I think not everybody has is the discipline to operate even when you don't want to. And I don't think that is something that people necessarily consider when they look at entrepreneurship and all the benefits. There are definitely some sacrifices that come with it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, procrastination is the death of success.
Very
And
true.
yeah, I mean, I've even been there. I think all of us at some point. Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything harder than you expected that's come about out of all of this? I mean, I'm sure outside of, the social kind of sacrifice you made, uh,
I
anything in
mean,
particular?
yeah, I mean, operating a business is not easy in general. Like, there are so
No,
many
it's
things
not.
that you don't know. There's so many things you don't know when you get into it, and you don't know what you don't know is the basic question that, I've always come back to, and so you really have to be able to trust your advisors to, give you the right advice and lead you down the right path. It's so important, and so, making sure that you educate yourself on especially in the alcoholic beverage space, on the legal requirements, on, filings, on the laws that are changing constantly in every single state and at a federal level. It's very complex and it's very competitive too. Running a business is a very competitive environment because everyone wants to succeed and everyone wants to be doing better than you. So finding partners that are wanna work in tandem and grow together, that has been one of the best things that I could have done for my business, and so, the competition is definitely something that I don't know that you really think about when you get into running your own business either.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at this point, almost I would say every market and industry is not flooded, but it's pretty hard to have like a breakthrough in
Right.
a space, and really it is difficult to differentiate yourself and yeah, I think it is important to have people around you who, like us, know the industry, know the space, know what works, what doesn't work, how to manage your money. Especially for me, it's like a huge one with people, and you would be
Yes.
surprised how people run their business finances like they do their personal finances. It's a great way, most people live paycheck to paycheck, and a lot of, especially smaller businesses, tend to live one customer
Very
deposit
true.
into their bank account to the next.
That is very
But
true.
yeah, but for someone listening to this who's maybe thinking about bourbon as an investment or just maybe a brand that's thinking about sourcing, what do you want them to know about how this actually works?
Yeah, I'll talk about the investors first. So, anyone that's interested in investing in the space, definitely educate yourself on the market, on the product and on the logistics of it, the economics of it. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about this. I started as, a little tiny investor at 21 years old, so I understand what it's like to be worried about where your money's going. And I always tell investors this is a diversification play. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It takes a long time to mature bourbon and whiskey as well. And so, it's not an opportunity where you can depend on this as a income. It is more of like passive generation for, growth down the line. And so I do think it's a great opportunity to diversify yourself into investments that are uncorrelated to the stock market. I think my personal portfolio is significantly in residential real estate, commercial real estate, whiskey barrels, and the stock market. And so a lot of those assets operate with completely different baseline indicators. And I think that that is what makes me feel so comfortable in my personal investment strategy. And so if one market's down, the other market can kind of hold that up. And that's really important because you can't time the market no matter what market you're in. Education is super important. Treat it as a diversification, not a get rich quick scheme. And I'm happy to help you with either of those that you need education on. And then in terms of clients on the sourcing side of things, we've got access to hundreds of thousands of barrels outside of our inventory and outside of our warehouse. I'm happy to help you find exactly what fits for you. And we also help with the actual logistical side of, managing your cost of goods, dry goods, getting you to a finished storage provider, finished goods storage provider, or helping you with the sales and the marketing after the fact. We would love to work with you to see if there's any opportunity to help you grow your brand, make your life a little bit easier, and standardize and streamline some of your current processes.
Awesome. Well, Morgan, before I let you go, tell everyone where they can find you and learn more about you, like websites, socials, things like that.
LinkedIn is definitely a great place to find me. Just Morgan Salsman. You can just type in my name, should be able to find me. And there's a liquid assets page as well. Instagram there too. Also on Facebook. And then website is going to be lqdassets.co. There's a lot of information on there, podcasts, interviews, and just details about our investment program, our warehousing, everything under the sun that we've talked about today.
Fantastic. Well, that's Morgan. Go, go follow her, go talk to her, and she'll help you out. But thanks, Morgan. Thanks for being on Behind the Skin.
Of course. Thanks, Scotty. It was great to be here.